The silver burned like liquid fire against my wrists, but I kept my face blank. 3 years of this had taught me not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. What am I bid for this defective Omega? The auctioneer's voice boomed across the packed amphitheater, and I felt hundreds of eyes rake over me like claws. No wolf, no voice, no use, except perhaps for manual labor. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Cruel, cutting sounds that I'd grown numb to. Almost. I stood on the raised platform in the thin white shift they'd given me, my bare feet cold against the wooden planks. The silver collar around my throat felt heavier today, a constant reminder of what I wasn't. What I'd never be. 22 years old and I'd never shifted. Never felt my wolf stir. The childhood accident that had stolen my voice had somehow stolen that too, leaving me hollow where others were whole. Come now, the auctioneer continued, his potbelly straining against his vest as he gestured at me with his cane. She's young, healthy. Perfect for kitchen work, cleaning, basic labor. Surely someone needs a silent servant? More laughter. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. 3 failed pairings. 3 alphas who'd taken one look at me and sent me back like a defective purchase. The first had lasted 2 days before declaring me unnatural. The second hadn't even waited that long. The third. I pushed that memory down deep where it couldn't hurt me. $50, someone called out. 75. The bidding was pathetic, even by my standards. I was worth less than a decent hunting rifle to these people. But then something strange happened. The voices around me began to blur, becoming something more than just sound. Whispers filled my head, not heard, but felt. Look at the broken thing. Waste of space. Should put her out of her misery. I stumbled, catching myself just before I fell. The silver shackles bit deeper into my wrists, drawing blood. What was happening to me? Poor little wolf. So lost, so afraid. This voice was different. Gentler. I turned, searching the crowd, but saw only the same sea of sneering faces. Can you hear me, little one? My breath caught. Someone was speaking directly into my mind. But that was impossible. Only the most powerful wolves could project thoughts, and they certainly wouldn't waste time on someone like me. Help me, I thought desperately, not even sure if I was doing it right. Please. The reaction was immediate. Every wolf in the amphitheater went rigid, their heads snapping toward me in perfect unison. The auctioneer's voice faltered mid-sentence. What, he began, but the words died as a new scent filled the air. Ancient. Powerful. Dangerous. The crowd began to part like water, making way for someone walking down the center aisle. I couldn't see who it was through the mass of bodies, but I felt him. A pressure in the air that made my skin prickle and my heart race. The whispers in my mind grew louder, more frantic. It can't be. He's been gone for years. Why is he here? God help us all. Then I saw him. The man walking toward the platform wore a black cloak that seemed to drink in the light around it. His face was hidden in shadow, but there was something about the way he moved, fluid, predatory, utterly controlled, that made every instinct I didn't know I had scream at me to run. He stopped at the foot of the platform, and slowly, deliberately, raised his head to look at me. My world tilted. His eyes were the color of winter storms, gray and silver and completely inhuman. When they met mine, something inside my chest cracked open like an egg, spilling warmth through my entire body. $1 million. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the amphitheater. The silence that followed was deafening. The auctioneer's mouth worked soundlessly for several seconds before he managed to stammer, that is, are you certain, my lord? Did I stutter? There was steel in those 3 words, sharp enough to cut. No. No, of course not. Going once, going twice, the gavel came down with a sharp crack. Sold to His Majesty, King Kieran Ashworth. The name hit the crowd like a physical blow. Kieran Ashworth. The Alpha King who'd vanished from public sight 5 years ago after some tragedy no one talked about in more than whispers. The most powerful wolf in North America, maybe the world. And he'd just bought me. He stepped onto the platform with fluid grace, moving like a shadow given form. Up close, I could see the sharp angles of his face, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were, like looking at a blade's edge or staring into an abyss. "Give me the key," he said to the auctioneer, who fumbled for the silver key to my shackles with shaking hands. Instead of simply unlocking them, Kieran took the silver chains in his bare hands. The metal should have burned him, should have left him writhing in agony. Instead, he snapped them like they were made of paper. I stared at him in shock, rubbing my freed wrists. How was that possible? His storm-gray eyes found mine again, and when he spoke, his voice was pitched low, for my ears alone. "Hello, little mate." Mate. The word hit me like a physical blow. It was impossible. I was defective, broken, useless. I couldn't be anyone's mate, let alone his. But as he reached out to touch my face with fingers that should have been burning from handling silver, something deep in my chest recognized him. Knew him. "Mine," whispered a voice that sounded suspiciously like the wolf I'd never had. The crowd was in chaos now, voices rising in shocked murmurs and frantic whispers. I caught fragments of thought from every direction. His true mate? But she's defective. Impossible. What does this mean? Kieran seemed utterly unbothered by the commotion. He shrugged out of his black cloak and wrapped it around my shoulders, the fabric warm and smelling of pine forests and winter storms. "Can you walk?" he asked gently. I nodded, not trusting myself to try signing with so many people watching. He offered me his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it. The crowd parted before us like the Red Sea as we walked down the aisle. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, but I could feel their stares, hear their thoughts buzzing in my head like angry wasps. We were almost to the exit when someone stepped into our path. Marcus Grayson, Alpha of the Crescent Moon Pack and one of the most influential wolves on the continent. He was also my third failed pairing, the one who'd. I forced myself not to think about what he'd done. What he'd tried to do. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, inclining his head in a bow that barely qualified as respectful. "Surely there's been some mistake. That Omega is damaged goods. Defective. I should know, I had her for a week." Kieran went very, very still beside me. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, conversational even. But there was something underneath it that made my blood run cold. "Are you suggesting I don't know my own mate when I see her?" Marcus's face went pale. "And no, of course not. But surely you can't mean to claim her as your queen. She can't even shift, can't speak. What use could she possibly?" The words cut off with a strangled gasp as Kieran moved faster than my eyes could follow. One moment he was beside me, the next he had Marcus lifted off his feet by the throat. "Let me be very clear," Kieran said, his voice still conversational despite the fact that he was slowly crushing another Alpha's windpipe. "No one, and I mean no one, speaks about my mate that way. Are we understood?" Marcus made a choking sound that might have been agreement. "Good." Kieran released him, and Marcus crumpled to the ground, gasping. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I have a queen to introduce to her new home." He turned back to me, offering his arm again as if nothing had happened. His storm-gray eyes were calm, almost gentle, but I could see the predator lurking just beneath the surface. What have I gotten myself into? I thought. As if he'd heard me, the corner of his mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "Everything you've been waiting for," came his voice in my head, warm and certain. "Trust me." And despite every logical reason not to, despite the fact that I'd just watched him nearly kill a man without breaking a sweat, I found that I did. The black limousine waiting outside looked like something out of a movie. Kieran opened the door for me himself, ignoring the driver who'd started to get out to do it. I slid across leather seats softer than anything I'd ever touched, the king's cloak still wrapped around me like armor. As the car pulled away from the auction house, I caught sight of my reflection in the tinted window. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't look broken. I looked like I belonged to someone who would burn the world down before letting anyone hurt me again. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like coming home. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 2. I woke to silk sheets and sunlight streaming through windows tall enough for giants. For a moment, I lay perfectly still, listening to the absence of sound. No shouting guards. No clanking chains. No other Omegas crying themselves awake in the cells beside mine. Just blessed, golden silence. The bedroom was easily larger than the entire dormitory I'd shared with 20 other rejected wolves. Persian rugs covered polished marble floors, and oil paintings in ornate frames lined walls that seemed to stretch up forever. A fireplace big enough to roast a whole deer dominated one wall, cold now but obviously well used. Everything was beautiful. Everything was expensive. And everything felt like a cage, no matter how gilded. I sat up slowly, my body protesting. The thin white shift from the auction had been replaced with a nightgown so fine I was afraid to breathe on it wrong. Someone had bathed me while I slept. The thought made my skin crawl, but I supposed unconscious was better than the alternative. A soft knock at the door made me freeze. "Miss Sarah? May I come in?" The voice was female, elderly, and kind. Still, I pulled the covers up to my chin before nodding, then remembered she couldn't see me. I waved my hand, which felt stupid, so I finally just cleared my throat. The sound that came out was barely a whisper, rough from years of disuse, but it was something. "Come in." The door opened to reveal a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair pulled into a neat bun and eyes the color of warm chocolate. She wore a simple black dress with a white apron, a housekeeper's uniform, but she carried herself with the dignity of a queen. "Good morning, dear. I'm Mrs. Chen, the head of household staff." She set down a silver tray on the bedside table, and the scent of bacon and fresh bread made my stomach clench with hunger. "His Majesty asked me to see to your needs." His Majesty. Right. I'd been bought by the Alpha King like a piece of livestock, and now I was supposed to what? Play house in his castle? Mrs. Chen seemed to read the confusion on my face. "He's in meetings all morning, but he'll want to see you after lunch. He asked me to show you around, help you get settled." She paused, studying me with those kind eyes. "Are you feeling all right, dear? You've been asleep for nearly 18 hours. 18 hours? No wonder I felt like I'd been hit by a truck." I started to nod, then remembered I could speak. "I'm fine. Thank you." My voice was still rough, barely above a whisper, but Mrs. Chen smiled like I'd just recited Shakespeare. "Wonderful. Now, let's get some food in you, shall we? You're nothing but skin and bones." The breakfast was the best meal I'd had in 3 years. Real eggs, not the powdered substitute they fed us at the facilities. Bacon that wasn't mostly fat and gristle. Bread so fresh it was still warm from the oven. I tried to eat slowly, with dignity, but I was so hungry I nearly made myself sick. Mrs. Chen watched me with a mixture of sadness and maternal concern that made my chest tight. "When you're ready," she said gently, "I'll show you to your wardrobe. His Majesty had everything prepared before you arrived." My wardrobe turned out to be a room bigger than most apartments, filled with clothes in every style and color imaginable. Dresses and pants and sweaters, all in my exact size. Shoes that actually fit. Undergarments made of silk and lace instead of rough cotton. How did he know my measurements? I asked, running my fingers over a particularly beautiful blue dress. Mrs. Chen's expression grew carefully neutral. "His Majesty is very thorough in his preparations." That should have been comforting. Instead, it sent a chill down my spine. How long had he been watching me? Planning this? I chose simple clothes, jeans and a green sweater that was softer than anything I'd ever owned. Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly and led me out into the hallways of Ashworth Castle. The place was enormous. Corridors stretched in every direction, lined with portraits of stern-faced alphas and elaborate tapestries depicting great battles. Servants moved through the halls like ghosts, bowing respectfully when they saw us but never making eye contact. The castle has been in the Ashworth family for over 4 centuries, Mrs. Chen explained as we walked. Each generation has added to it. His Majesty's great-grandfather built the East Wing, his grandfather the gardens. His father added the modern security systems and communications center. What did Kieran add? I asked without thinking, then flushed. I probably shouldn't call the Alpha King by his first name. Mrs. Chen didn't seem bothered by my familiarity. Sanctuary, she said simply. She led me to what she called the garden room, though it was more like a small cathedral made of glass. Sunlight streamed through the transparent walls and ceiling, illuminating the most beautiful indoor garden I'd ever seen. Fruit trees heavy with apples and pears, flowering vines that climbed toward the sky, and vegetables growing in neat, organized rows. But it wasn't the plants that made me stop and stare. It was the people tending them. A young man with skin pale as paper was carefully watering tomato plants, moving with the fluid grace I associated with vampires. But vampires didn't do manual labor. They certainly didn't garden in direct sunlight. Near the apple trees, a woman who couldn't have been much older than me was pruning branches with intense concentration. Her hair was the white blonde of winter, and her ears came to delicate points. Faye. But something was wrong with the light around her. It flickered and dimmed instead of the steady glow all Faye carried. I don't understand, I whispered. This is where His Majesty houses those who need sanctuary, Mrs. Chen explained gently. Supernaturals who've been cast out by their own kind for various deficiencies. Deficiencies. Like me. The vampire is Thomas. He was born without the ability to feed from humans, can only sustain himself on animal blood, which makes him an outcast among his clan. The Fae is Luna. She lost her glamour in a magical accident and was exiled from the summer court. I watched them work, these broken creatures like me, and felt something loosen in my chest. I wasn't alone here. There's a witch in the library who can't cast spells, Mrs. Chen continued. A phoenix who can't resurrect. A Selkie who lost her seal skin. His Majesty gives them all purpose, protection. Why? The word slipped out before I could stop it. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment. I think that's a question you should ask him yourself, dear. She showed me the rest of the castle, the massive library with its rolling ladders and ancient texts, the great hall with its long tables and soaring ceilings, the training rooms where I could hear the sound of combat even through the thick stone walls. But my mind kept returning to that garden and the outcasts who'd found refuge here. Was that all I was? Another broken thing for Kieran's collection? Lunch was served in my room, more delicious food I didn't deserve, eaten off china so delicate I was afraid to use the knife. Mrs. Chen had laid out a formal dress for the afternoon, midnight blue with a high neckline and long sleeves. Conservative but elegant. His Majesty will see you in his study at 2 o'clock, she informed me as she helped me into the dress. The fabric felt like wearing liquid starlight. I wanted to ask what he wanted to see me about, but I was afraid I already knew. Yesterday he'd called me his mate, but in the cold light of day, that had to be some kind of mistake. Or worse, some kind of game. Kieran's study was all dark wood and leather-bound books, with windows that looked out over the castle's extensive grounds. He stood with his back to me when Mrs. Chen announced my arrival, hands clasped behind him as he stared out at the forest beyond. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. That will be all. The door closed with a soft click, leaving us alone. In daylight, he was even more imposing than he'd been at the auction. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that seemed to fill a room. He'd traded his black cloak for a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than most people made in a year. He didn't turn around. I trust you slept well, he said, his voice carrying that same quiet authority I remembered. Yes, Your Majesty. The formal title felt awkward on my tongue. Kieran, he corrected, still not turning. We're past formalities, I think. Were we? I had no idea what we were past or what we were heading toward. Mrs. Chen showed me around, I said carefully. It's beautiful here. But you're wondering why you're here. It wasn't a question. I waited, watching the rigid line of his shoulders. You're here for protection, he said finally. There are those who would use you to get to me. Here, you're safe. Protection from what? From whom? And why would anyone want to use me against him? Because you're his mate, whispered a voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like hope. But when he finally turned around, his face was a mask of polite indifference. Whatever heat I'd seen in his eyes at the auction was gone, replaced by the cool assessment of a businessman reviewing an acquisition. You'll be expected to attend formal functions as my companion, he continued. Mrs. Chen will help you prepare. In return, you'll have everything you need: food, clothing, protection, purpose. Purpose. The same word Mrs. Chen had used about the other outcasts. What kind of purpose? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Something flickered in his storm-gray eyes. We'll discuss that later. For now, focus on getting settled. He moved to his desk, a clear dismissal, but I found myself rooted to the spot. Kieran. His name felt strange on my lips, too intimate for whatever this cold transaction was supposed to be. He looked up, one dark eyebrow raised in question. Yesterday, you called me your mate. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. For a moment, his careful mask slipped, and I caught a glimpse of something raw and desperate in his expression. Then it was gone, locked away behind those storm-colored walls. I called you many things yesterday, he said evenly. Most of them were for show. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face heat with embarrassment and something that might have been heartbreak if I were stupid enough to have hoped for more. I see. My voice came out steady, which was a minor miracle. Thank you for your honesty. I turned to go, but his voice stopped me at the door. Sarah. I looked back, hating myself for the flutter of hope in my chest. Tonight there's a formal dinner with the pack elders. 7 o'clock in the Great Hall. Mrs. Chen will help you prepare. I nodded and left without another word, my cheeks burning with humiliation. For show. Of course it had been for show. What else would the Alpha King want with a broken Omega who couldn't even shift? The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Chen helped me into an elegant black dress that made me look like I belonged in a magazine instead of a charity case. She styled my hair into an intricate updo and applied makeup with an artist's skill. You look beautiful, dear, she said, stepping back to admire her work. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, polished, elegant, almost pretty if you didn't look too closely at the haunted expression in her eyes. Mrs. Chen, I said quietly. What happened to Kieran? 5 years ago, I mean. Why did he disappear from public? Her hands stilled on my shoulders. That's not my story to tell, dear. But. She met my eyes in the mirror. He's not the same man he was before. The curse, she stopped herself, looking stricken. What curse? But she was already shaking her head. I've said too much. Come, we don't want to be late. The Great Hall was even more impressive at night, lit by hundreds of candles in ornate chandeliers. A long table stretched down the center, already filled with the most powerful wolves in the kingdom. I recognized several faces from news broadcasts and pack newsletters, alphas who controlled territories the size of small countries. Kieran stood at the head of the table in a black tuxedo that made him look like a prince from a dark fairy tale. When he saw me, something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe, or approval, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. He pulled out the chair to his right, the place of honor typically reserved for Aluna. The message was clear: whatever else I was to him, I was under his protection. The dinner conversation was all politics and territory disputes, trade agreements and pack alliances. I tried to follow along, but most of it went over my head. I was grateful that the elaborate table settings gave me something to focus on besides the stares I could feel from every direction. It was during the third course that the whispers started again. At first, I thought it was just the normal murmur of conversation. But then the voices became clearer, more distinct, and I realized with growing horror that I was hearing thoughts again. She's prettier than I expected. Still defective, though. What's he thinking? This could work in our favor if we play it right. I gripped my fork tighter, trying to block out the mental chatter. But it was like trying to stop a dam from breaking with my bare hands. The king looks weak. Distracted. Perfect timing for what we discussed. Tonight, after the moon sets. My head snapped up, searching the faces around the table. Who was thinking about tonight? What were they planning? The silver blade will cut through his defenses. One strike, and the curse will be irrelevant. The fork clattered from my numb fingers, drawing attention from the nearby diners. But I barely noticed. My eyes were fixed on Councilman Aldrich, an elderly alpha who'd served the Ashworth family for decades. His thoughts were crystal clear now, playing out in my mind like a movie. The plan was simple. During the new moon, when Kieran's powers were at their weakest due to the curse, Aldrich would strike. A silver blade to the heart, quick and clean. The council would claim it was an assassination by rival packs, and Aldrich's nephew would take the throne. He suspects nothing. Trusting fool. I tried to speak, to warn Kieran, but my voice had abandoned me again. The mental pressure was building, threatening to split my skull open. Get control, I told myself desperately. Don't let them see. But it was too late. The dam burst. Every thought in the room hit me at once, a tsunami of mental noise that sent me reeling. I heard marriage proposals and business deals, petty jealousies and deadly secrets. It was too much, too loud, too overwhelming. I screamed. The sound tore from my throat like a physical thing, silencing every conversation in the hall. But worse than the scream were the words that followed, words I couldn't stop, pulled from my lips by the telepathic storm raging in my head. He's going to kill you. I gasped, pointing a shaking finger at Councilman Aldrich. Tonight, with a silver blade. He thinks you're weak because of the curse. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room was fixed on me, and I could feel the weight of their stares like physical pressure. Aldrich rose slowly from his seat, his aged face a mask of righteous indignation. This is preposterous. The girl is clearly unstable. Delusional. But Kieran was watching me with those storm-gray eyes, and I could see the terrible understanding dawning in them. Guards, he said quietly. 4 men materialized from the shadows along the walls, moving with supernatural speed. Aldrich tried to run, but he was old and they were young. They had him restrained in seconds. Search him, Kieran ordered. They found the silver blade tucked into a sheath at Aldrich's ankle, ornate and wickedly sharp, with runes carved along the blade that seemed to drink in the candlelight. Well, Kieran said softly, and his voice carried a promise of violence that made the air itself seem to thicken. That's interesting. Aldrich's face had gone gray. Your Majesty, I can explain. I'm sure you can. Kieran rose from his chair with fluid grace, but there was nothing human in the way he moved now. In fact, I look forward to hearing your explanation. At length. He turned to the rest of the council, who were all trying very hard not to look at him directly. Ladies and gentlemen, dinner is over. Please return to your rooms. Guards will be posted to ensure your safety until this matter is resolved. The hall cleared quickly after that, alphas who commanded armies suddenly very eager to be somewhere else. Only Kieran and I remained, along with the guards and their prisoner. I sat frozen in my chair, the aftermath of the telepathic surge leaving me shaky and exhausted. My head felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. Kieran approached slowly, as if I were a wild animal that might bolt. When he reached me, he crouched down so we were at eye level. How long? He asked quietly. I didn't pretend not to understand. Since yesterday. At the auction. He nodded, unsurprised. It started when you reached out to me. You knew. It wasn't a question. I suspected. Telepathy is rare, but not unheard of in bloodlines touched by old magic. His eyes searched my face. The question is, how much can you hear? The honest answer terrified me. Everything. Everyone. Their thoughts are so loud I can barely think sometimes. He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Take her back to her room, he told the nearest guard. Post someone outside her door. For her protection, he added when he saw my expression. I started to rise, but his hand on my wrist stopped me. Sarah. I met his eyes, and for a moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped again. Thank you. You saved my life tonight. The simple words shouldn't have meant so much. But after a lifetime of being told I was useless, they hit me like a revelation. I managed a shaky nod and let the guard escort me from the hall. But as we walked through the corridors toward my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just changed the game completely. And I still didn't understand the rules. It wasn't until I was back in my gilded cage of a bedroom that the other shoe dropped. Kieran appeared in my doorway an hour later, having dismissed the guard with a look. He'd shed his formal jacket and tie, and with his shirt partially unbuttoned and his hair slightly mussed, he looked less like a king and more like a man. A dangerous man who'd just had someone try to kill him. We need to talk, he said, closing the door behind him. I was sitting by the fireplace in a silk robe Mrs. Chen had provided, trying to process everything that had happened. The telepathic feedback had left me feeling raw and exposed, like a nerve ending stripped of its protective coating. About what? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. He moved to the window, staring out at the moonless night. About why I really bought you. And there it was. The truth I'd been dreading. It wasn't because you're my mate, I said. It wasn't a question. No. The single word hit me like a physical blow. Though the bond between us is real enough. I can feel it even if you can't. I can feel it, I wanted to say. It's the only thing keeping me sane right now. But I kept my mouth shut and waited for him to continue. I've known about your abilities for months, he said quietly. Ever since the first reports started coming in about the defective Omega who made wolves nervous for no apparent reason. Months. He'd been watching me for months. The curse that's killing me, it's more than just a death sentence. It's made me vulnerable. Enemies smell weakness, and they're circling like vultures. He turned from the window to face me. I need someone I can trust to read the minds of those around me. Someone who can identify threats before they become attempts on my life. Like tonight. He moved closer, and I could smell that scent of winter storms and pine forests that seemed to cling to him. I need a weapon, Sarah. And you're the most dangerous weapon I've ever encountered. I stared at him, feeling something inside my chest crack and bleed. So this is all business. A transaction. Yes. The word was like a knife between my ribs. I'd known it, of course. Known that someone like him could never really want someone like me. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that hurt more than I'd expected. And if I refuse? I asked. He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. Then you're free to go. I'll give you money, new papers, a fresh start somewhere far from here. You'll never have to see me again. The offer was everything I should have wanted. Freedom. Independence. A chance to start over without anyone expecting anything from me. So why did the thought of leaving make me feel like I was suffocating? What kind of curse? I asked instead. His jaw tightened. Does it matter? It does to me. He stared at me for a long moment, then moved to the fireplace. With economical motions, he unbuttoned his shirt and let it fall to the floor. I gasped. His chest and shoulders were covered in what looked like black veins, spreading out from his heart like cracks in glass. The marks pulsed with each heartbeat, and I could see the darkness creeping slowly toward his throat. "Blood magic," he said without looking at me. "Cast by a witch I trusted. She wanted to bind me to her, make me her puppet. When I refused." He gestured at the marks. "This was her revenge. How long do you have?" "Months. Maybe less." He pulled his shirt back on, hiding the evidence of his mortality. "The only way to break it is through a true mate's bond. But as you've pointed out, you're not actually my mate." The lie sat between us like a third presence in the room. Because whatever else he was hiding, whatever games he was playing, the pull I felt toward him was real. The way my body responded to his presence, the way something in my chest recognized him, that couldn't be faked. "I'll do it," I said quietly. He went very still. "What?" "I'll be your weapon. Your mind reader. Whatever you need." I met his eyes across the room. "But I have conditions." Something that might have been relief flickered across his face. "Name them. I want to know everything. The curse, your enemies, what you're really fighting against. I won't go in blind." He nodded slowly. "Agreed. And I want training. If I'm going to be telepathic, I need to learn how to control it. The feedback tonight nearly killed me. I know someone who can help. A witch who owes me a favor. And..." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the hardest condition. "I want honesty between us. No more lies, no more manipulation. If we're going to work together, we do it as partners." He was quiet for a long time, and I wondered if I'd pushed too far. But finally, he nodded. "Partners," he agreed. He moved toward the door, but stopped with his hand on the handle. "Sarah?" "Yes?" "For what it's worth. I am sorry. You deserve better than this." And then he was gone, leaving me alone with the firelight and the terrible realization that I was falling for a man who'd bought me like a tool and would probably get me killed. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I had a purpose beyond simple survival. Even if that purpose might destroy me. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 3. The training started at dawn. I stood in the castle's courtyard, shivering in the morning mist while Kieran paced behind me like a caged predator. 3 days had passed since the dinner disaster, and every moment had been filled with lessons in mental shielding, telepathic focus, and the delicate art of reading minds without losing my own. Again, Kieran commanded, his voice sharp with frustration. "Focus on one mind at a time. Build walls around the others." Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one with a dozen different thoughts screaming in his head simultaneously. I closed my eyes and reached out tentatively with my abilities. The castle was full of minds, servants going about their daily routines, guards at their posts, the other outcasts in their sanctuary. Their thoughts crashed over me like waves against rocks. Must remember to change the linens in the blue room. Hope the Alpha doesn't notice I was late this morning. Thomas is looking pale again. Should suggest he hunt tonight. The new Omega smells wrong. Different. That last thought made me stumble, and the carefully constructed mental barriers I'd been building collapsed. Pain lanced through my skull as every mind in 100-yard radius suddenly became accessible. I gasped and fell to my knees, pressing my palms against my temples as the telepathic feedback threatened to tear my consciousness apart. Strong hands gripped my shoulders, and suddenly there was blessed silence. Kieran's presence in my mind was like a cool compress against burning skin, wrapping around my thoughts and creating a buffer against the mental noise. "Breathe," he murmured, his voice directly in my head rather than spoken aloud. "Let me anchor you." I leaned into his mental embrace, grateful for the respite. But even as the pain faded, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Each time I used my abilities, it left me weaker. My hands had started shaking yesterday, and this morning I'd noticed dark circles under my eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. "That's enough for today," Kieran said, helping me to my feet. His storm gray eyes were troubled as they searched my face. "You're pushing too hard." "I'm fine," I lied, swaying slightly as the world tilted around me. His expression said he didn't believe me any more than I did. "Sarah." His voice carried a note of warning. "I need you functional, not burned out. If these abilities are harming you." "They're not." The lie came out sharper than I'd intended. "I just need more practice." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. But we're changing tactics. Instead of broad sweeps, we're going to focus on specific targets." He pulled a folder from his jacket and handed it to me. Inside were photographs and dossiers on 3 men I didn't recognize, all powerful-looking alphas with the kind of cold eyes I'd learned to fear. Marcus Brightwater of the Northern Territories, Vincent Cross of the Eastern Seaboard, and Daniel Ravencrest of the Mountain Clans, Kieran explained. "Intelligence suggests they're planning something during the lunar eclipse ceremony next week." The lunar eclipse ceremony. I'd heard whispers about it from the servants, an ancient ritual that took place once every 7 years, when the supernatural community gathered to renew their bonds of allegiance to the Alpha King. "What kind of something?" I asked, studying the photographs. All 3 men had the look of predators barely restrained by civilized behavior. The kind that ends with me dead and them dividing my territory between them. His voice was matter-of-fact, but I caught the flash of something darker in his eyes. "I need to know their exact plans. When, how, who else is involved?" I nodded, closing the folder. "When do we start?" "Tonight. There's a gathering at Brightwater's estate, ostensibly a hunting party, but really a cover for their planning session. You and I will attend as guests." Something cold settled in my stomach. "As mates." "As mates," he confirmed. "It's the only way to get close enough for you to read their intentions without raising suspicion." The thought of pretending to be his mate, of acting out an intimacy that didn't exist, made my chest tight with a mixture of dread and something that felt dangerously like anticipation. "I can do it," I said, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. His eyes softened slightly. "I know you can. But Sarah, some of these men were at the auction. They know what you were, what you represented. If they suspect you're more than you seem." "They won't," I said firmly. "I'll be the perfect broken omega. Silent, submissive, forgettable." Something flickered across his face at that, anger, maybe, or pain. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Good," he said quietly. "Mrs. Chen has prepared appropriate clothes. We leave at sunset." The dress Mrs. Chen had chosen was a masterpiece of subtle elegance, deep emerald silk that brought out my eyes and clung to my figure without being obvious about it. She'd styled my hair in a way that made me look sophisticated but not threatening, and applied makeup that concealed the growing pallor of my skin. "You look beautiful, dear," she said, stepping back to admire her work. I stared at my reflection, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at me. For a moment, I looked like someone who belonged at Kieran's side. Someone worthy of being called his mate. The illusion shattered the moment he appeared in the doorway. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that emphasized his powerful build, and his dark hair was styled with casual precision. He looked like sin wrapped in expensive fabric, and when his storm gray eyes met mine in the mirror, something hot and electric passed between us. "Ready?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The drive to Brightwater's estate took 2 hours through winding mountain roads. Kieran spent most of it briefing me on the other guests we'd encounter, their relationships, their pack hierarchies. I tried to focus, but I kept getting distracted by his presence beside me in the back seat of the limousine. He'd been different since our agreement 3 days ago, more open about pack business, more willing to explain the political complexities I'd never understood. But there was still a careful distance between us, a professional courtesy that reminded me this was all business. Even if my treacherous heart kept forgetting that fact. "Remember," he said as we pulled up to the estate's impressive gates, "you're mine. My mate, my property, my responsibility. Let me do the talking, stay close, and use your abilities sparingly. We can't afford for you to collapse in front of potential enemies." I bristled at the property comment, but I understood the necessity. In the world we were entering, I needed to play the part of a traditional Omega mate, beautiful, silent, and utterly devoted to my alpha. The estate was a monument to wealth and power, all soaring columns and manicured gardens. Guests milled about the grand foyer in their finest clothes, the air thick with the complex web of pack politics and supernatural power plays. Kieran's hand settled possessively on the small of my back as we entered, and I felt every eye in the room turn toward us. The whispers started immediately. "Is that really her? The defective one from the auction? She cleans up well, I'll give her that. Wonder what she's like in bed. Must be something special for the king to claim her." I kept my face blank and my eyes downcast, playing my part. But inside, my abilities were already reaching out, sampling the thoughts of everyone around us. Most were exactly what I expected: curiosity about me, speculation about Kieran's choice, the usual petty jealousies and political maneuverings of any high society gathering. But underneath it all, I sensed something else. A current of tension, of anticipation. Something was definitely being planned. "Your Majesty." Marcus Brightwater approached us with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was a big man, built like a linebacker, with graying hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention. "So good of you to come. And you must be the famous Sarah." He extended his hand to me, and I hesitated for just a moment before taking it. The contact sent a jolt through my telepathic senses, and suddenly I was drowning in his thoughts. So this is the broken toy he's playing with. Perfect. She'll be a useful distraction when the time comes. He won't expect betrayal from someone so pathetic. I managed to keep my expression neutral as I pulled my hand back, but the effort left me dizzy. Kieran's arm tightened around my waist, steadying me. "Sarah doesn't speak," he said smoothly. "An old injury. But she hears everything." The double meaning wasn't lost on Brightwater, who nodded knowingly. "Of course. How convenient for you." We were led to a dining room where about 30 guests were seated around an elaborate table. I found myself placed between Kieran and Vincent Cross, a pale, thin man with calculating eyes and thoughts like poisoned honey. The dinner conversation was all surface pleasantries, hunting stories, business ventures, pack gossip. But underneath the civilized veneer, I could feel the undercurrents of conspiracy. Cross kept glancing at his watch. Brightwater's thoughts were focused on timing and opportunity. And Daniel Ravencrest, seated across from us, was practically vibrating with barely contained excitement. "Almost time," Cross was thinking. "Just need to keep them distracted a little longer." "The eclipse ritual will be perfect," came Ravencrest's mental voice. All the packs gathered in one place, all eyes on the ceremony. "He'll never see it coming." 7 days, Brightwater added to the mental chorus. 7 days and this will all be over. I reached for my water glass with a shaking hand, trying to process what I was hearing. The lunar eclipse ceremony wasn't just their target, it was their deadline. They were planning to kill Kieran during the most sacred ritual in werewolf culture, in front of every major pack leader in North America. Kieran's hand covered mine on the table, his thumb stroking across my knuckles in what looked like an affectionate gesture. But I could feel his tension, sense his awareness of my distress. "What are you hearing?" His voice whispered in my mind. I couldn't respond telepathically, that was a skill I hadn't mastered yet, so I squeezed his hand twice. Our predetermined signal for imminent danger. His expression didn't change, but I felt him go on high alert beside me. The evening continued with forced normalcy, but I could feel the conspiracy crystallizing around us. More details emerged from the random thoughts I intercepted. Silver bullets blessed by a dark witch. A coordinated attack from 3 directions. Plans to blame it on rogues from the Western Territories. The division of Kieran's lands and resources. By the time we excused ourselves to retire to the guest room Brightwater had prepared, I was exhausted and shaking with the effort of maintaining my mental barriers while simultaneously eavesdropping on the conspiracy. The guest room was elegant but impersonal, with a four-poster bed that dominated the space and a fireplace that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Kieran checked the room methodically for listening devices while I collapsed into an armchair, my head spinning with telepathic overload. "Well?" he asked quietly once he'd completed his sweep. "The lunar eclipse ceremony," I whispered. "They're going to kill you during the ritual. Silver bullets, coordinated attack, 3 directions." The words came out in a rush as I tried to relay everything I'd learned. His face went granite hard. "How many others are involved?" I couldn't tell for sure. "But it's more than just the 3 of them. They mentioned the Western Territories, but as a scapegoat, not actual participants." He nodded grimly and pulled out his phone, typing quickly. Probably alerting his security team, rearranging the ceremony protocols. "You did well tonight," he said without looking up from his phone. The simple words of praise shouldn't have meant so much, but they sent warmth spreading through my chest. I was about to respond when a wave of dizziness hit me like a physical blow. The room tilted sideways, and I gripped the arms of the chair to keep from falling. "Sarah?" Kieran was beside me instantly, his hands on my shoulders. "What's wrong?" "I'm fine," I started to say, but the lie died on my lips as my vision began to blur. Suddenly I wasn't in the guest room anymore. I was somewhere else, someone else, looking through eyes that weren't my own. A woman with my face stood in what looked like the same guest room, but different somehow. Older. The furniture was arranged differently, and there were flowers on the nightstand that weren't there now. She was crying, her hands pressed against her temples in a gesture I recognized because I'd made it myself so many times. "I can't make it stop," she was saying to someone I couldn't see. "Their thoughts, their memories, they're all mixing together. I don't know who I am anymore." "You're Luna," came a familiar voice. Kieran's voice, but younger somehow. Warmer. "You're my mate, and I love you, and we'll find a way to fix this." But the woman, Luna, was shaking her head frantically. "No, you don't understand. I'm not just hearing thoughts anymore. I'm experiencing their memories. Living their lives. Yesterday I remembered being someone's grandmother who died 50 years ago. This morning I was a child who never made it past her 5th birthday." Her voice broke on a sob. "I'm disappearing, Kieran. Every day, there's less of me and more of them." The vision shattered, leaving me gasping and disoriented back in the present. Kieran was holding me against his chest, his voice a low murmur of comfort I couldn't quite make out over the ringing in my ears. "What did you see?" he asked urgently. I pulled back to look at him, taking in the familiar storm-gray eyes, the sharp angles of his face. But now I could see the ghosts lurking in his expression, old pain, old loss, old love. "Luna," I whispered. He went very still. "What about Luna?" "She looked exactly like me." The words came out steady despite the chaos in my head. "Same face, same hair, same everything. And she had abilities like mine." His arms tightened around me. "Sarah. She didn't die, did she?" I interrupted, pieces of a larger puzzle starting to click into place. "She's still alive somewhere." The silence stretched between us, heavy with secrets and half-truths. Finally, Kieran sighed and pulled away from me, running his hands through his hair. "The Forbidden Tower," he said quietly. "East Wing, highest room. She's been there for 5 years." My blood went cold. "In the tower? Like a prisoner? Like a patient?" His voice was flat, emotionless. The Echo Wolf abilities destroyed her mind. "She doesn't recognize me, doesn't recognize anyone. Most days she doesn't even recognize herself." Echo Wolf. The term sent chills down my spine. I'd heard whispers of such creatures in the old stories, wolves who could channel the memories and abilities of the dead. Legend said they either became incredibly powerful or lost their sanity completely. That's what I am, isn't it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. An echo wolf. He nodded reluctantly. It's why your abilities are so strong, why they're growing so quickly. But it's also why they're dangerous. Each time you use them, you're opening yourself to the voices of dead wolves. Their memories, their experiences, their personalities. And eventually? I prompted. Eventually, there won't be enough of you left to hold them all, he said quietly. You'll become a vessel for every wolf who ever lived, and Sarah Blackthorne will cease to exist. The words hit me like a physical blow. I was dying. Not from disease or injury, but from the gradual erosion of my own identity. Every time I used my abilities to help him, I was trading pieces of my soul. How long? I asked. Luna lasted 2 years after her abilities manifested. You've had yours for less than a week. He couldn't meet my eyes. I don't know. I should have been terrified. Should have been angry at him for not telling me, for using me despite knowing the cost. Instead, I felt oddly calm. Is that why you need me? Because I'm like her? Partially. He moved to the window, staring out at the moonless night. But there's more to it than that. I waited, sensing there was something else he wasn't telling me. The witch who created the blood curse on me, he said finally. Her name was Morgana Blackthorne. The name hit me like a slap. Blackthorne. Like my name. Not like your name. Your name. He turned to face me, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach drop. Sarah, you weren't born. You were created. Made from Luna's essence and Morgana's magic to be either her salvation or her replacement. The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. That's impossible, I whispered. Is it? Think about it. No parents you remember, no early childhood memories, no pack history before the age of 12. You've always just existed. He was right. I'd always assumed my lack of early memories was trauma from whatever accident had stolen my voice. But now that he mentioned it, I couldn't remember anything before waking up in that first facility, alone and voiceless and already marked as defective. Morgana thought she could transfer Luna's consciousness into a new body, Kieran continued relentlessly. Free her from the madness, give us a fresh start. When that didn't work, she decided you could serve another purpose, as bait to draw me out of hiding. But you found me first, I said numbly. I've been watching you for 3 years, ever since I discovered what you were. Waiting for your abilities to manifest, hoping. He trailed off. Hoping what? Hoping you might be able to reach her. To somehow bring back the woman I love. And there it was. The truth that cut deeper than any blade. I wasn't his mate. I wasn't even really a person in my own right. I was a magical construct created to replace the woman he'd lost, and when that failed, repurposed as a tool in his war against his enemies. The woman he loved was locked in a tower, lost in madness, and I was just her shadow. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady but my resolve crystallizing. I want to see her, I said. Sarah. I want to see Luna. Tonight. He studied my face for a long moment, probably reading the determination there. Finally, he nodded. All right. But Sarah, she's not the woman you saw in that vision anymore. The madness has taken almost everything that made her who she was. I squared my shoulders. Then maybe it's time to find out what's left. We slipped out of Brightwater's estate under cover of darkness, making our excuses about an early morning engagement back at the castle. The drive home was silent, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I spent the time trying to process everything I'd learned. I was an artificial being created by a witch. My abilities were slowly destroying my sanity. The man I was falling for was only using me to try to save his real mate. And somehow, none of that mattered as much as the growing certainty that I needed to reach Luna. Not for Kieran's sake, but for my own. If she was my template, my original, then maybe understanding her fate would help me avoid it. Or maybe it would just confirm what I already suspected, that I was living on borrowed time, and the clock was running out. The Forbidden Tower was exactly what it sounded like, a tall, narrow spire attached to the castle's east wing, with windows that had been bricked over and a single door that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. But appearances were deceiving. The door swung open easily at Kieran's touch, revealing a spiral staircase that climbed up into darkness. Our footsteps echoed off the stone walls as we climbed, and I could feel Kieran's tension increasing with each step. Whatever we were about to find at the top of this tower, he didn't want to face it any more than I did. The room at the top was larger than I'd expected, circular and filled with soft furniture and warm lighting. It looked more like a comfortable sitting room than a prison cell, if you ignored the heavy locks on the inside of the door and the way all the windows were sealed. In the center of the room, sitting in a rocking chair by an unlit fireplace, was the woman from my vision. She was exactly what you'd expect from looking at me in 20 years, the same dark hair now streaked with premature silver, the same green eyes that had once been bright with intelligence but were now vacant and unfocused. She was beautiful still, but there was something fragile about her, like porcelain that had been cracked and carefully glued back together. She didn't look up when we entered. "Hello, Luna," Kieran said softly. She tilted her head at the sound of his voice, and for a moment something flickered in her eyes that might have been recognition. But then it was gone, replaced by the same empty stare. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice as fragile as spun glass. "I'm Kieran," he said gently. "And this is Sarah." Luna's gaze shifted to me, and suddenly her entire demeanor changed. She shot to her feet with supernatural speed, backing away from us with her hands pressed against her temples. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. You can't be here. You're not real. I made you up. I made you up because I was lonely, because I was scared, because I wanted to be someone else." "Luna," Kieran started toward her, but she shrank back. "Don't." The word came out as a scream. "Don't touch me. Every time someone touches me, I become them. I live their memories, feel their pain. I can't, I won't." She looked at me again, and this time the recognition in her eyes was absolute and terrifying. "You're me," she said wonderingly. "But not me. Young me. Innocent me. Before the voices started, before the madness." Her laugh was broken glass and bitter tears. "Oh, Morgana, you clever witch. You made me a sister." "I'm not you," I said quietly. "Aren't you?" She stepped closer, studying my face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Same face, same heart, same cursed abilities. Do you hear them yet? The voices of the dead?" I thought about the visions I'd been having, the way my abilities seemed to be growing stronger and more dangerous each day. "Sometimes," I admitted. She nodded knowingly. "It starts with just a few whispers in the dark. Then more and more until you can't tell which thoughts are yours and which belong to wolves who died centuries ago." She reached out as if to touch my face, then pulled her hand back. "How long since your abilities manifested?" "A week. A week." She laughed again, the sound like breaking bells. "I had 2 years. You might have less. Luna." Kieran's voice was thick with emotion. "Please. Look at me." She turned to him slowly, and for a moment her expression cleared. I saw a flash of the woman she'd been, intelligent, strong, deeply in love. "Kieran," she whispered. "My beautiful, broken alpha. Still trying to save me after all these years." "I'll never stop trying," he said. "You should." The clarity was already fading from her eyes. "I'm not the woman you loved anymore. Haven't been for a long time. That Luna died the day the voices became louder than my own thoughts." She looked at me again. "But maybe this one can be what I never could. Maybe she's strong enough to hold on to herself while using what we are." "What are we?" I asked. "We're the bridges between the living and the dead," she said simply. We're the voices of wolves who can no longer speak for themselves. And we're the weapons that can destroy kingdoms or save them. She moved to the window, staring out at the night sky even though the glass was covered with heavy boards. The eclipse comes, she said suddenly. 7 days hence. And with it, the choice that will determine whether the supernatural world burns or finds balance. What choice? I asked, but she was already retreating back into herself. So many voices, she murmured, returning to her rocking chair. So many stories to tell. Did I ever tell you about the wolf who loved a human so much she gave up her immortality? Or the alpha who sacrificed his pack to save a single pup? And just like that, she was gone again. Lost in the labyrinth of other people's memories, other people's lives. Kieran and I stood in silence for several minutes, watching her rock back and forth as she murmured stories that might have been real or might have been delusions. We should go, he said finally. I nodded, but as we reached the door, Luna's voice stopped us. Sarah. I turned back. She was looking directly at me with more clarity than I'd seen since we arrived. The tower has books, she said. Hidden behind the loose stone by the fireplace. Everything Morgana knew about Echo Wolves, everything she learned trying to save me. Read them. Luna. And Sarah? She smiled, and for a moment she looked almost normal. Don't let him sacrifice himself for me. I'm already gone. You're the one with a future worth saving. The walk back to the main castle was silent, both of us processing what we'd witnessed. But as we reached my bedroom door, I turned to face Kieran. I heard you earlier, I said quietly. When you were talking to Marcus on the phone while I was getting ready. He went very still. What did you hear? You called me just a tool. Said you could never love someone so broken. His face went carefully blank. Sarah. It's fine, I interrupted. I know what I am to you. What Luna is to you. I just needed to hear you admit it. I started to go into my room, but his hand on my arm stopped me. What you heard, he said quietly, was me trying to convince myself that keeping you at arm's length would protect us both. I looked up at him, seeing something raw and vulnerable in his storm-gray eyes. But the truth is, he continued, I'm terrified of caring about you the way I cared about her. Because loving an Echo Wolf means watching them disappear piece by piece, and I don't think I'm strong enough to survive that twice. The confession hung between us like a bridge I was afraid to cross. Because crossing it would mean admitting that somewhere in the midst of all the lies and manipulation, something real had grown between us. Something that would make the inevitable end so much more painful. 7 days, I said instead. That's how long we have to stop this conspiracy and figure out how to save your life. He nodded. 7 days. Then we'd better get started. I went into my room and closed the door behind me, leaning against it as I tried to process everything that had happened. Tomorrow I would read Morgana's hidden books. Tomorrow I would start planning how to use my abilities to save Kieran during the eclipse ceremony. Tonight, I would try to hold on to the pieces of myself that were still purely Sarah Blackthorne. Because Luna was right about one thing, the voices were getting louder. And I was running out of time. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 4. The ancient stones of the eclipse ceremony grounds hummed with power as wolves from across the continent gathered under the blood-red moon. I stood beside Kieran on the raised dais, wearing ceremonial robes of midnight blue that marked me as his chosen mate. The fabric was heavy with silver thread that caught the moonlight, and around my throat was Luna's collar, a piece of Ashworth history that had been worn by queens for 3 centuries. It felt like wearing a lie. The past 4 days had been a blur of preparation and revelation. Morgana's hidden books had contained everything Luna promised, detailed accounts of Echo Wolf abilities, the dangers they posed, and most importantly, the ways they could be controlled. I'd learned that my visions weren't random, they were Luna's memories bleeding through our shared essence, trying to tell me something crucial. but I still didn't know what. Around us, hundreds of pack leaders and their retinues filled the ancient amphitheater carved into the mountainside. The ceremony only happened during the eclipse of the blood moon, when the supernatural world's power was at its peak. It was meant to be a renewal of bonds, a reaffirmation of loyalty to the Alpha King. Instead, it was about to become a battlefield. They're here, I thought, scanning the crowd with my abilities. Brightwater, Cross, Ravencrest. All in position. But as my telepathic senses swept across the gathered wolves, I felt something that made my blood run cold. The conspiracy was bigger than we thought. Much bigger. At least 30 wolves, I projected to Kieran, who stood rigid beside me. Maybe more. They'd been planning this for months. His jaw tightened, but he gave no other sign that he'd heard me. To the crowd, we looked like the perfect royal couple, powerful, united, unshakable. The truth was far more complicated. Since our conversation outside my bedroom door, Kieran had been even more distant. Professional to the point of coldness, careful never to touch me unless ceremony demanded it. I told myself it was better this way, that the growing feelings between us were a distraction we couldn't afford. But it hurt more than I wanted to admit. The ceremony began with the traditional calling of the packs. One by one, the alpha leaders stepped forward to renew their oaths of loyalty, their voices ringing out across the stone amphitheater. Everything proceeded normally until Marcus Brightwater approached the dais. Instead of the ritual words of fealty, he smiled, cold and predatory. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the amphitheater. "Before I pledge my loyalty, I have a question." This wasn't part of the ceremony. Kieran's hand found mine, his fingers squeezing once in warning. "Speak," Kieran said, his voice carrying absolute authority despite the trap that was clearly closing around us. "Is it true that you've mated with a defective Omega?" Brightwater's words hit the crowd like a physical blow, sending ripples of shocked murmurs through the assembled wolves. "That you've elevated an artificial construct to the position of queen?" The insult was deliberate, calculated to undermine Kieran's authority in front of every major pack in North America. But worse than the insult was the accuracy. Brightwater knew exactly what I was. Kieran stepped forward, and I felt the temperature around us drop by several degrees. "Choose your next words very carefully, Brightwater," he said quietly. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. But Brightwater was past the point of caution. "I choose truth," he declared. "This woman is not your mate. She's not even really a woman. She's a magical construct created by a witch to replace your true queen." The crowd erupted. Shouts of outrage, confusion, fear. Some wolves were already shifting, sensing the violence that was about to explode around us. "Now," I heard Cross think. "While they're distracted." The attack came from 3 directions at once. Silver bullets flew toward the dais from concealed positions in the crowd. Brightwater lunged forward with a blade that gleamed with dark magic. Ravencrest's wolves charged from the left flank, their eyes blazing with supernatural fury. But I was ready. The world slowed around me as I embraced my Echo Wolf abilities completely for the first time. Every dead wolf who'd ever lived seemed to whisper their knowledge into my mind: battle tactics, magical techniques, secrets of power that had been lost for centuries. "Protect the king," their voices commanded. "Preserve the bloodline." Power exploded out of me like a tsunami of pure will. The silver bullets stopped in midair, suspended by telekinetic force I didn't know I possessed. Brightwater's charge became a stumbling crawl as I reached into his mind and scrambled his motor functions. The attacking wolves found themselves fighting phantoms, illusions drawn from the memories of ancient battles. But the effort was tearing me apart. Blood ran from my nose and ears as I channeled more power than any living being should be able to contain. The voices of the dead were getting louder, more insistent, threatening to drown out my own thoughts entirely. "Let us in," they whispered. "Let us take control. We know how to win this." "Sarah." Kieran's voice cut through the mental chaos, anchoring me to the present. He was beside me, his own power blazing as he fought off the attackers I couldn't handle. "Don't lose yourself. But I was already slipping away. Each second I maintained this level of power, more of my identity dissolved into the collective consciousness of dead wolves. I could feel myself becoming them, their memories, their personalities, their ancient hunger for battle. Hold on, I told myself desperately. Hold on to who you are. That's when I saw him. Marcus, not Brightwater, but Marcus Thorne, Kieran's beta and most trusted friend. Standing at the edge of the amphitheater with silver bullets in his hand and betrayal in his eyes. His thoughts hit me like a physical blow. She was supposed to die quietly. Supposed to burn herself out trying to save Luna and fail. But she's too strong, adapting too quickly. If she survives this, she might actually succeed where I failed. Can't let her heal my sister. Can't let her take Luna's place. Not when it's Kieran's fault Luna is broken in the first place. The truth crashed over me in waves of rage and anguish that weren't entirely my own. Marcus wasn't just part of the conspiracy, he was the one orchestrating it. Luna's own brother, driven mad by grief and guilt, had spent 5 years planning the destruction of the man he held responsible for his sister's condition. Marcus. I screamed, my voice carrying supernatural force that shattered stone. Every head in the amphitheater turned toward him. He stood frozen for a moment, caught between fleeing and fighting. Then his face twisted with bitter resolve. You should have died in that tower with her, he snarled, raising his gun toward Kieran. But I was already moving, my Echo Wolf abilities reaching out to stop him. Power crashed against power as he revealed his own magical defenses, protections that had been years in the making, specifically designed to counter abilities like mine. The collision of our forces sent shockwaves through the amphitheater. Ancient stones cracked. Wolves were thrown to their knees by the pressure. And somewhere in the chaos, I felt my grip on sanity finally begin to slip. Too much, I realized dimly. Too much power, too many voices. I'm losing myself. That's when Kieran's mind touched mine. The contact was unexpected, intimate in a way that bypassed all our careful barriers. Suddenly I wasn't just fighting with my own memories, I was experiencing his. Luna, laughing as she chased butterflies through the castle gardens. Her eyes bright with intelligence as she helped him navigate pack politics. Her tears as the voices started, as her abilities grew beyond her control. I love you, she whispered in his memory. But I can't stay. The madness is taking me, and I won't let it take you too. His desperate attempts to find a cure. The witch who promised help but delivered betrayal. The blood curse that was meant to bind him to Morgana's will. Luna's sacrifice to protect him, channeling her fading sanity into a spell that would keep him alive long enough to find another way. And then, me. Standing on that auction block, and the moment his world tilted on its axis. Not because I looked like Luna, but because something in his soul recognized me as his true mate. The fear that followed. The desperate attempts to keep distance between us. The growing certainty that he was falling in love with me, not as Luna's replacement, but as myself. I can't lose another mate, his thoughts whispered. I can't survive watching her disappear the way Luna did. The revelation should have been overwhelming. Instead, it gave me something to hold on to, an anchor in the storm of ancient voices threatening to consume my identity. I am Sarah Blackthorne, I told myself firmly. I am not Luna, not a pale copy, not a magical construct. I am myself, and I choose to fight. Power flooded through me again, but this time it was controlled. Focused. Instead of drowning in the voices of the dead, I learned to direct them. Marcus's magical defenses crumbled like paper before the combined wisdom of centuries of supernatural warfare. I reached into his mind with surgical precision, not to destroy but to understand. What I found there broke my heart. He'd loved his sister more than life itself. When her abilities manifested, he'd been the one to help her hide them, to research ways to control them. He'd watched helplessly as she lost pieces of herself day by day, until the vibrant woman he'd known became a hollow shell. And when she'd chosen to sacrifice her sanity to save Kieran's life, Marcus had seen it as the ultimate betrayal. Not just by Kieran, but by Luna herself. She chose him over her own family, his anguished thoughts revealed. Chose to live as a shadow so he could survive his curse. And for what? So he could replace her with an artificial copy? She didn't choose to leave you, I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the amphitheater. The fighting had stopped, every wolf present could sense the supernatural forces at play, the weight of truth being revealed. She chose to save him because she knew he was the only one who could find a way to bring her back. Marcus laughed bitterly. 5 years, construct. 5 years he's had to save her, and she's only gotten worse. Because he didn't understand what she'd done, I replied. None of us did. But I do now. I reached deeper into Luna's memories, following the threads of the spell she'd woven in her final moments of clarity. It was brilliant and desperate and utterly selfless, a working of such complexity that it had taken me days of study to even comprehend its scope. She hadn't just protected Kieran from the blood curse. She'd bound herself to it, taking the dark magic into her own soul and using her Echo Wolf abilities to contain it. Every day for 5 years, she'd been fighting Morgana's spell from within her own mind, keeping it from killing the man she loved. But the effort was burning her out from the inside. Soon, there wouldn't be enough of Luna left to maintain the binding, and the curse would return to Kieran with interest. Unless someone else took up the burden. The spell can be transferred, I said, looking directly at Marcus. But only to another Echo Wolf. Only to someone with the strength to contain it. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by horror. No, he whispered. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for him the way she did. I'm not sacrificing myself, I replied calmly. I'm choosing to complete what she started. There's a difference. I turned to Kieran, seeing my own understanding reflected in his storm-gray eyes. He'd figured it out too, what Luna had done, what I was proposing to do. Sarah, no, he said quietly. I won't let you. It's not your choice to make, I interrupted. It never was. The spell Luna had woven was like a puzzle box that could only be opened from the inside. But with her memories guiding me, I could see the pattern. Could understand how to take the dark magic into myself without letting it destroy me. The key was balance. Instead of trying to contain Morgana's curse the way Luna had, would redirect it. Use the combined voices of dead wolves to create a shield around not just Kieran, but everyone I cared about. Mrs. Chen, Thomas, the other outcasts in our sanctuary. All of them would be protected. And the curse would be transformed from a weapon of destruction into a source of strength. But the price would be my humanity. To channel that much power permanently, I would have to let the Echo Wolf abilities take complete control. I would become something more than human, but less than myself. Worth it, I decided. He's worth it. They're all worth it. Stop her. Marcus roared, raising his gun again. But before he could fire, another voice cut through the chaos. Marcus. Luna stood at the entrance to the amphitheater, still wearing her simple white dress but moving with a purpose I hadn't seen in the tower. Her eyes were clear, focused, and filled with a sadness that seemed to encompass worlds. Sister, Marcus whispered, his weapon forgotten. I've been conscious all along, she said, walking slowly toward us. Each step seemed to cost her enormous effort, but her voice was steady. Fighting the curse, yes, but also watching. Listening. Learning. She stopped in front of me, studying my face with the same intensity I'd seen in the tower. You're not my replacement, she said quietly. You're my completion. The other half of what Morgana tried to create. She wanted to transfer my consciousness into a new body, but magic doesn't work that way. Instead, she split my essence in two. My breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying we're not twins or copies or original and construct. Luna smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked completely sane. We're two halves of the same soul, separated by magic and circumstance. She reached out to touch my face, and instead of the chaos I'd expected, I felt peace. Wholeness. Like finding a part of myself I hadn't known was missing. The curse can't be transferred to you, she continued. Because you already carry half of it. I've been fighting Morgana's magic alone for 5 years, but together. Together we can destroy it completely, I finished, understanding flooding through me. Luna nodded. But it will require both of us to give up our separate existences. We'll become something new, not Luna, not Sarah, but a fusion of both. And Kieran? I asked, though I already knew the answer. We'll finally be free to love without fear of loss, she said softly. Because what we become won't be bound by the limitations that destroyed me. We'll be stronger than any echo wolf who ever lived. I looked at Kieran, seeing the anguish in his expression. He was losing us both, the woman he'd loved for years and the woman he was learning to love. But he was also gaining something neither of us could offer alone. Do it, he said quietly. Luna and I joined hands in the center of the amphitheater, and power began to build between us like a gathering storm. But this wasn't the wild, destructive force I'd channeled before. This was controlled, purposeful, shaped by 2 minds working in perfect harmony. The blood curse fought us, lashing out with Morgana's dying rage. But we were stronger now. Complete in a way neither of us had been alone. I felt my individual identity beginning to dissolve, but instead of the terror I'd expected, there was only peace. I wasn't losing myself, I was becoming part of something greater. The last thing I saw before the transformation took hold was Kieran's face, and the absolute love burning in his storm-gray eyes. Not just for Luna, I realized with wonder. For both of us. For what we're becoming. Then the world exploded into light, and Sarah Blackthorne and Luna Ashworth ceased to exist. What emerged from that light was something new. Something that had never existed before in the long history of supernatural beings. She opened her eyes, eyes that held the green of Luna's intelligence and the fire of Sarah's determination, and smiled. The curse was broken. The conspiracy was ended. Marcus knelt in the ruins of his hatred, finally understanding that his sister had found not death but transcendence. And Kieran. Kieran stepped forward to take the hand of his true mate. Not Luna reborn, not Sarah transformed, but someone entirely new who carried the best of both women he'd loved. Hello, she said, her voice a harmony of 2 souls united. I think it's time we were properly introduced. The blood moon overhead began to fade, but the light emanating from the woman who had been 2 now filled the amphitheater with warmth and power and the promise of a future none of them had dared to hope for. The Alpha King had his queen at last. And she was perfect. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 5. The woman who had been both Sarah and Luna stood in the center of the Eclipse Amphitheater, her form shimmering like heat waves as 2 souls struggled to find equilibrium within one body. I could feel myself fracturing. The fusion had been perfect for those first few moments, complete understanding, perfect unity, the curse shattered like glass under our combined power. But now, in the aftermath, I was drowning in conflicting memories and emotions that belonged to 2 different lives. Kieran's hands in my hair as he whispered my name, but was I Sarah receiving his touch, or Luna remembering years of marriage? The taste of freedom when I first left the auction block, but Luna had never known captivity, had been born to privilege and power. The scent of pine forests and winter storms that meant safety, but which version of safety? Luna's certainty in her mate's protection, or Sarah's desperate hope for acceptance? Sarah? Kieran's voice cut through the chaos in my head. Sarah, look at me. I tried to focus on his face, but it kept shifting between 2 different versions, the young Alpha who had courted Luna with flowers and poetry, and the broken king who had bought a damaged Omega at auction. Both were real. Both were him. And I was somehow both women who had loved different aspects of the same man. I can't, the words came out in Luna's cultured accent, then shifted mid-sentence to Sarah's rougher tones. Hold this together. The assembled wolves were watching in horrified fascination as their new queen apparently had a mental breakdown in front of them. I could hear their thoughts, a cacophony of doubt and fear that made everything worse. Is she mad? What have we done, accepting this creature as our ruler? The king has bound himself to madness again. Everyone out. Kieran's voice carried absolute authority. Now. The amphitheater cleared quickly, pack leaders and their retinues fleeing the scene with supernatural speed. Only Marcus remained, standing at the edge of the ancient stones with tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and I felt the genuine anguish in his thoughts. "I'm so sorry, Luna. Sarah. Whoever you are now." The apology might have meant something if I could figure out who I was supposed to be to accept it. Kieran approached slowly, his hands raised like he was approaching a wounded animal. Which, I supposed, wasn't far from the truth. "Tell me what you're experiencing," he said softly. "Everything." My voice was becoming more stable, settling somewhere between Luna's soprano and Sarah's raspy whisper. "I remember being your wife, planning our wedding, the way you looked at me on our mating night. But I also remember being sold like cattle, standing on that auction block, the way you looked at me like I was broken." His face went pale. "Sarah. Which name?" I laughed, and the sound was edged with hysteria. "Which woman? Because I can't tell the difference anymore." Luna's memories feel as real as Sarah's. Her emotions, her love for you, her sacrifice, it's all mixed up with my feelings, my choices. I stumbled backward, power crackling around me in uncontrolled waves. The ancient stones beneath my feet began to crack from the pressure. "I don't know who I am," I whispered. That's when Marcus stepped forward, his face etched with a grief so profound it made my chest ache. "You're not Luna," he said quietly. "And you're not Sarah. You're something new, something neither of them could be alone." He took another step closer, ignoring the dangerous energy radiating from my skin. My sister was brilliant and strong and absolutely convinced she knew what was best for everyone. Including herself. He smiled through his tears. She also never could admit when she was wrong. But Sarah. Sarah questioned everything. Fought for every scrap of dignity, every moment of happiness. Luna had power handed to her. Sarah had to earn hers. His words hit me like a revelation. He was right, the memories might be tangled, but the core personalities were distinct. Luna's confident certainty felt foreign to me, while Sarah's stubborn resilience felt like home. "You're Sarah who carries Luna's legacy," Marcus continued. "Not Luna reborn, not Sarah enhanced. You're yourself, with the strength of two souls to draw from." The power around me began to stabilize as I focused on that truth. I wasn't trying to be Luna or trying to stay exactly as Sarah had been. I was becoming something entirely new. But that realization brought its own complications. "The curse," I said, looking at Kieran. "When we broke Morgana's spell, what happened to Luna's original body?" His expression grew carefully neutral. "She's still in the tower." "Still alive?" A pause. "Yes." The word hit me like a physical blow. I'd assumed that when Luna's essence joined with mine, her physical form would simply fade. But magic was never that convenient. "She's awake, isn't she?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the guilt in his eyes. "Since the moment the curse broke," he admitted. "But Sarah, she's not the same woman who made that sacrifice." The Echo Wolf abilities damaged her mind severely. She doesn't remember much of anything from before. Including him. Including their marriage, their bond, the love that had driven her to sacrifice her sanity for his life. The irony was crushing. I'd gained all of Luna's memories and emotions, while she'd lost them entirely. "I have to see her," I said. Kieran's jaw tightened. "That's not a good idea. She's part of me now. Literally part of me. I need to understand what's left, what she needs." I straightened, feeling some of Luna's imperious nature bleeding through. "And you can't stop me." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "As you wish, my queen." The title sent a jolt through me. Queen. Luna had been a queen. Sarah had been chattel. Now I was somehow both, and the cognitive dissonance was making my head spin. We made the journey to the tower in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Marcus came with us, his need to see his sister overriding any concerns about his recent betrayal. Kieran hadn't ordered his arrest, I suspected, because we all understood that grief could make monsters of the best people. The woman in the tower room looked exactly like me, but emptier somehow. She sat by the window in a shaft of morning sunlight, her hands folded in her lap like a well-behaved child. When we entered, she looked up with Luna's green eyes but none of her intelligence. "Hello," she said politely. "Are you here to visit?" "I don't get many visitors." My heart broke a little. This was what Luna had become in order to save Kieran, a shell, beautiful but hollow. "Hello, Luna," I said gently. "I'm a friend." She tilted her head, studying my face with mild curiosity. "You look like me. Are we sisters?" "Something like that." I sat down across from her, trying to reconcile this lost woman with the memories I carried of her brilliant mind. "Do you remember anything? About before?" "Before what?" She seemed genuinely puzzled. "There's only now. Sometimes I have dreams, but they don't make sense. A man with sad eyes who brings me flowers. A brother who used to read me stories. A battle where everything ended." She looked at Kieran, and for a moment something flickered in her expression. "You have sad eyes," she observed. "Like the man in my dreams." "Are you him?" "Yes," Kieran said quietly. "I am." "Oh." She considered this with the detached interest of someone examining an interesting insect. "Were we friends?" The question was like a knife to the heart. I felt Kieran's anguish through our partial bond, the pain of being forgotten by someone he'd loved for years. "We were married," he said. "Married?" She repeated the word like she was testing how it felt on her tongue. "That means we loved each other?" "Yes." "I don't remember love," she said matter-of-factly. "I don't remember much of anything, really. But sometimes I dream about a woman with golden hair who made me laugh. She was a warrior, I think. Very brave." My breath caught as I recognized the memory from Luna's consciousness. Not a random dream, a real person. Someone Luna had cared about deeply. "Tell me about the woman in your dreams," I said gently. Luna's face lit up with the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her. She was beautiful. Strong. She fought beside the men but was better than most of them. And she. Luna's expression grew confused. She made me feel things. Warm things. Happy things. I felt Kieran go very still beside me. Through our bond, I could sense his shock as he realized what Luna was describing. "What was her name?" I asked. "Arya," Luna said immediately. "Her name was Arya Nightwind, and she died in the battle against the Shadow Pact 5 years ago. I remember that much." Her face crumpled with sudden, devastating grief. "I remember her dying. I remember holding her while she bled, and I remember wishing I could trade places with her." The pieces clicked into place with brutal clarity. Luna hadn't sacrificed herself for romantic love of Kieran. She'd been drowning in grief for her lost love, for a woman who'd died in the same battle that had brought Morgana's curse down on the Alpha King. "Luna," I said carefully, "were you and Arya lovers?" she finished simply. "Yes. She was my true mate, not." She looked at Kieran with something like apology. "I'm sorry. I know we were married, but I never felt for you what I felt for her." The admission should have been crushing. Instead, I felt nothing but relief. Luna's sacrifice hadn't been about losing the love of her life, it had been about guilt and duty and a grief-stricken woman's attempt to find meaning in her pain. "The mating bond between us," Kieran said slowly, "it was political. Arranged by our fathers," Luna confirmed. "You were kind to me. Patient. You tried to make me happy. But my heart belonged to someone else." I reached over and took her hand, feeling the strange sensation of touching myself. You don't have to apologize for that. Love isn't something we can control. She smiled, and for a moment I saw a flash of the brilliant woman she'd been. You understand. You love him too, don't you? Really love him, the way I loved Arya. The truth of it hit me like lightning. Yes, I loved Kieran. Not with Luna's dutiful affection or her guilt-driven sacrifice, but with Sarah's fierce, hard-won devotion. I loved his strength and his vulnerability, his protective instincts and his terrible loneliness. I loved him for seeing value in the broken things of the world, for giving sanctuary to the outcasts and unwanted. Yes, I said simply. I do. Luna nodded as if this was exactly what she'd expected. Good. He deserves to be loved properly. She looked at Marcus, who'd been standing frozen by the door. Hello, brother. You look older. Luna. Marcus's voice broke on her name. I'm so sorry. For everything. For not understanding what you'd done, for trying to hurt Kieran, for... Shoo. Luna held up a hand, stopping his litany of guilt. You thought you were protecting me. But Marcus, I need you to understand. What I did for all of us. Not just for Kieran, but for every wolf who would have suffered under Morgana's rule. She stood up, moving with some of her old grace despite the emptiness in her eyes. The curse wasn't just killing him. It was designed to spread through the pack bonds, to eventually corrupt every supernatural in North America. My sacrifice contained it, but it was never meant to be permanent. She looked at me with sudden clarity that was startling in its intensity. You completed what I started. But there's still work to be done. What do you mean? I asked. Morgana's curse is broken, but its effects linger. In Kieran, in the pack bonds, in the very fabric of supernatural society. Luna moved to the window, staring out at the castle grounds. I can feel it like poison in the air. It will take all of your combined power to cleanse it completely. Our combined power, I repeated. You mean? I mean I can give you what's left of my life force, she said calmly. Complete the fusion permanently. You'll have access to not just my memories, but all of my accumulated power. Enough to heal the damage Morgana did and then some. The offer was staggering. And terrifying. That would kill you, I said. I'm already dead in every way that matters. Her voice was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. This body is just a shell housing memories I can't properly access. But you could use what I have left to become something unprecedented. She turned back to me, and her smile was radiant. The most powerful werewolf who ever lived. Strong enough to change everything, to build the world Arya and I dreamed of. A world where strength comes from unity, not domination. Where the broken and rejected have value. The temptation was enormous. With Luna's remaining power added to my own, I could reshape supernatural society. Protect the outcasts, challenge the old hierarchies, create lasting change. But it would mean accepting Luna's death. Again. I can't, I whispered. You can, she said firmly. Because it's not a sacrifice this time. It's a choice. My choice, made freely and with full understanding of what I'm doing. She moved closer, taking my hands in hers. The contact sent waves of power through both of us, and I could feel the truth of what she was offering. Not suicide, but completion. The final step in a transformation that had begun 5 years ago. Kieran, Luna said, not looking away from me. Do you consent to this? There was a long pause before he answered. It's not my choice to make. But you're part of this bond now, Luna insisted. Your opinion matters. Another pause. Then, quietly, I think you've carried this burden long enough. If this is what you want, what you need, then yes. I consent. Luna smiled and squeezed my hands. Then it's decided. The transfer was nothing like the violent fusion during the eclipse ceremony. This was gentle, natural, like water flowing from one vessel to another. Luna's remaining essence merged with mine so smoothly I barely felt it happening. But the results were immediate and staggering. Power flooded through me, not just magical ability, but knowledge, understanding, perspective gained over centuries of supernatural history. I could feel every pack bond in North America, sense the lingering corruption from Morgana's curse, understand exactly what needed to be done to heal it. When it was over, Luna's body simply faded. Not dramatically, just a gradual dissolution into motes of light that drifted away on a breeze that touched only her. "Thank you," her voice whispered in my mind one last time. "Take care of them. All of them." And then she was gone, truly gone, leaving only her final gift behind. I stood in the empty tower room, power thrumming through my veins like electricity, and felt more myself than I ever had before. Not Sarah trying to be Luna, not Luna's pale echo, but someone entirely new. Someone with the strength to change everything. "Sarah?" Kieran's voice was uncertain. I turned to face him, and smiled. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and strong for the first time in years, "I think it's time for a new name." Sarah was the broken Omega sold at auction. Luna was the queen who sacrificed herself for duty. I stepped closer to him, feeling the mate bond between us singing with possibility. "I choose to be someone else. Someone who's both and neither." "Who?" he asked. I reached up to cup his face in my hands, marveling at how right it felt. How perfectly we fit together. "I choose to be yours. Your true mate, your equal, your queen." I smiled, feeling joy bubble up from somewhere deep inside. "I choose us." He kissed me then, and it was like coming home and starting an adventure at the same time. Through our bond, I felt his love, not the desperate grief he'd carried for Luna, not the guilty affection he'd felt for Sarah, but something bright and fierce and completely new. When we broke apart, I turned to Marcus, who was staring at the spot where his sister had been with tears streaming down his face. "She's at peace," I told him gently. "She's with Arya now, wherever warriors go when their battles are done." He nodded, unable to speak. "But her work isn't finished," I continued. "She wanted to build a better world. A place where strength comes from connection, not domination. Where the broken and rejected have value." I straightened, feeling the weight of responsibility and the thrill of possibility. "Will you help me build it?" Marcus looked at me for a long moment, then dropped to one knee. "My queen," he said formally. "It would be my honor." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Using the power Luna had given me, I was able to cleanse the lingering effects of Morgana's curse from the pack bonds across North America. The work was exhausting but exhilarating. I could literally feel the supernatural world becoming healthier, stronger, more balanced. But the real changes were just beginning. I established sanctuaries in every major territory, safe havens for rejected wolves, broken supernaturals, anyone who didn't fit the traditional molds. Thomas was put in charge of the vampire sanctuary, Luna Nightbreeze led the Fae division, and other outcasts from Kieran's collection became leaders in their own right. The old pack structures began to evolve, becoming less hierarchical and more cooperative. Omegas were no longer automatically considered lesser, and Alphas learned that true strength came from lifting others up rather than keeping them down. Not everyone was happy with the changes. There were challenges, conflicts, entire packs that refused to adapt. But with Kieran's support and my growing network of allies, we weathered every storm. The most satisfying moment came 6 months after the eclipse ceremony, when I presided over the first auction of my new era. But instead of selling rejected wolves, we were buying them, freeing every Omega on the block and offering them choices. Sanctuary, training, new lives built on their own terms. I stood on the same platform where I'd once been sold like livestock, wearing a crown that had been forged from the silver of my old shackles, and felt the circle complete itself. "Your Majesty," Mrs. Chen said as I returned to the castle that evening. "There's someone here to see you." A young girl, maybe 16. She says she's been rejected by 3 packs for being unable to shift. I smiled, recognizing the familiar story. "Send her to my study." "And Mrs. Chen?" "Have the kitchen prepare her favorite meal." She'll be hungry, and probably hasn't eaten well in days. How do you know what her favorite meal is? Mrs. Chen asked, puzzled. Because, I said, heading toward my study where a frightened girl was about to learn that her life was about to change for the better. I used to be her. That night, as Kieran and I lay in our bed, finally, truly ours, I traced patterns on his chest and marveled at how far we'd both come. Do you ever regret it? I asked quietly. Choosing me over Luna? He caught my hand, bringing it to his lips to press a gentle kiss to my palm. I didn't choose you over Luna, he said. I chose love over duty, connection over obligation, a future over the past. He smiled, and his storm-gray eyes were warm with contentment. I chose us, just like you did. I settled against his side, listening to his heartbeat, and felt the rightness of it in my bones. We'd both been broken when we found each other, him by grief and guilt, me by rejection and abuse. But somehow, our broken pieces had fit together to make something stronger than either of us had been alone. Outside our window, I could sense the supernatural world settling into new patterns, new possibilities. Children who might once have been cast out for their differences were finding acceptance. Adults who'd been broken by rejection were discovering their worth. And everywhere, the old hierarchies were giving way to something better. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was better, and it was ours. I was no longer the defective Omega sold at auction. I was no longer the magical construct created to replace someone else. I was something entirely new, a queen who ruled not through dominance but through connection, an Omega who'd claimed her crown not by suppressing her nature but by embracing it fully. I was exactly who I was meant to be. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily and also, to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.